Hi everybody, it's Susan again. This time I wanted to explain the house system. I have been promising you in the comments section for weeks that I will describe the differences between the different houses. And then in the meantime, aside from being extremely distracted and busy for various good reasons, we've seen an entire discussion around the house system kind of blow up in the astrological world and become quite polarized. So I don't want to go into that debate. I want to say right up front that I don't believe there is a right or a wrong house system. I think that you want to choose which one works for you and which one you can navigate the best, especially if you're a practicing astrologer. You want to feel confident that you're going to get the information you need when you're talking to a client or a friend or anybody that you're doing a reading for. I'm going to give you the really basic 101 version of why the house systems are different and why you also experience different houses when I'm talking about the updates, for example, the Pluto and Aquarius update. There are a lot of you in the comments that are saying, wait a minute, Pluto is not in this house according to what you're saying, it's in this house. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood exactly what I'm referring to when I'm talking about the houses, and especially from the point of view of what you want to understand in terms of your transits. Right off the bat, it's important to understand that I cannot do a Placidus reading for you unless I have your birth time. And this is the case for every astrologer who's doing an interpretation of transits in a general way, because all we can do is a house by house interpretation using the signs. And by definition, this requires a whole sign chart. Now, a whole sign chart is distinguished from, say, a quadrant chart, like a Placidus chart, because the ascendant, which you see here with my chart as an example, is within the first house. Let me show you what that looks like then if we go to Placidus. And now in the Placidus chart, we have my ascendant still at almost 29 of Cancer. But now most of Cancer goes into the 12th house because that's the beginning of the first house. The ascendant decree, rather than the ascendant sign, dictates where the first house begins. And this is why for many of you there's a discrepancy between what I'm saying and what you're seeing in your chart. So you want to be aware of what house system you're referring to when you're talking about your natal chart. And keep in mind that I don't see your natal chart, and so I will never be able to give a general description of the transits using a quadrant house system. Because of the geographic location of where I was born, the houses are not equal sizes, and so some are very big and some are very small. That will also dictate where the actual signs end up and where the transits start and end in terms of a Placidus reading. Right here, for example, we can see that my ninth house cusp is at 9 degrees 40 minutes of Pisces, which is conjunct my sun. We see also that my Venus is in the 7th house in the Placidus system. And we can see that the moon goes into the 12th house. Jupiter goes into the 11th. And although my north node in Taurus stays in the 11th, it's now combining with a Jupiter in Gemini. Let's go back to the whole sign system and see what that looks like. Now with the whole sign system, my ascendant is still at 29-ish of Cancer. My moon is now in the first house. Jupiter is in the 12th house because it's only where Gemini is found in my chart, and my north node is still in the 11th house, but at the end of it and still in Taurus. My ninth house stellium is now no longer referring to the ninth house cusp, although I can always go back to Placidus and find out where that cusp is, because the cusps are important. Now my Venus is in the 8th house, still conjunct the descendant, but the descendant, because it's at the end of Capricorn, is just a part of my 7th house, and it's not where the 7th house begins. So let's have a look at the transits. I'm going to use my solar return since I'm recording this close to my birthday. And if we see the transits, then we start to understand what we're actually talking about when we're talking about the planets moving in or out of a sign, or ingressing or egressing a sign. So around the time of my birthday, which makes this my solar return chart, it's now going to have Pluto almost at the end of my 7th house on my descendant, and Pluto started into my 7th house at the very beginning of 2008. In fact, I was already experiencing that transit months before in the later part of 2007. And this, for some of you, answers the question that I also get quite frequently, which is, can I already feel a transit before it actually ingresses the sign? And yes, indeed, because especially if you have planets close to the early degrees or the late degrees of a sign, it's going to be extremely personal to you. For example, I'm already feeling this Pluto not only on my descendant, but on my natal Venus, even though Pluto hasn't yet gone into Aquarius. Another important part of this exploration of house systems, and my purpose here is simply to help you understand why different readings come out with different house systems. Again, I'm going to let you go into the details of the potentially polarizing debate about which house system to use. I re-emphasize that I don't think there's a right one. I think there's a right one for you. And what I want to show you is that when you don't really have a good or reliable birth time, imagine you kind of think it's around 8 in the morning, you're not too sure, it could be 8:30, it could be 9, not sure, then I would suggest that you rely on the whole sign system, because the whole sign system will give you the placement of the planets without you needing to know the ascendant. And indeed, just to remind you, if we look at how Placidus changes the lineup of the planets, you really need to know your ascendant before you can trust these shifts. So before you can use Placidus, for example, or Campana or Koch or any of these other quadrant type house systems, you absolutely must know your ascendant degree. Otherwise, it's a big guessing game and it can throw things off, as you can see, because the planets start to shift into a different house. That will give you a qualitatively different reading compared to what you know when you know your ascendant. So just to summarize, if you can't rely on your birth time, then just go with a whole sign reading, because this will give you the placement and the house according to the sign, which tells you an enormous amount already, and it doesn't confuse the issue by potentially getting the ascendant wrong. Now keep in mind all of these different changes that we have in the planets. For example, the Sun is on the cusp of the 9th, and Venus is on the cusp of the 7th, and my Moon is deep into the 12th in the Placidus system. And then if we go back to the whole sign system, now we see that my Moon is in the first house, that my Venus is in the 8th house, and that my Sun is well into the 9th house. But what I will recall when I'm doing an individual reading is precisely that other way of looking at my chart, which tells me where the cusps are and how that might affect the placement of the planets. So for example, without even needing to go back into Placidus, I can tell by the degree points that that Moon, if I were using a quadrant chart, would be in the 12th house. Now I understand that it acts as if it's a first house Moon and a 12th house Moon. And those two things I keep in mind when I'm doing a reading. Same thing with the Venus. Venus is acting as if it's a 7th house Venus and an 8th house Venus. Obviously, she doesn't leave Aquarius. And same with the Jupiter. We have Jupiter both acting as a 12th house and as an 11th house Jupiter if we're relying on the quadrant house system. So this is especially important for astrologers. If you're not that deep into astrology, don't worry about what I just said. Just let it be. But just know that these are compatible. You can use these two house systems or these two ways of looking at the chart and get an enormous amount of extra detail when you do. When I first started doing astrology readings, I only used Placidus. I did a lot of evolutionary astrology courses in the very beginning, and in particular, I worked a lot with Stephen Forrest, who's an absolutely wonderful and lovely man and a great astrologer. And yet I wasn't really feeling the experience that people were sharing with me in the chart. And so I started to work my way towards the whole sign system through Vedic astrology, through other interpretations of astrology, and also through the understanding of ancient astrology, Hellenistic astrology in particular. All of that has informed my astrology. None of it is better or worse than the other. It's simply that I found my groove. I found where it is that I can now read a chart and feel very confident in what I'm telling somebody. And so once again, I just want to say you will find yours, your system, And it's neither good nor bad, nor right nor wrong. You just want to find what works for you, what makes you feel like you've understood something about your life or the life of your client, and if it's helpful, stick with it. Don't get into the weeds around these debates that are polarizing and completely distracting from the beauty of astrology. So I'm going to leave it there because I just wanted to give the really basic understanding of why there might be differences in readings or differences in understanding of the chart. It's just the context that the astrologer is using to find the placements within the chart. So I hope I've answered some of your questions, and thanks for asking them because I love your questions in the comments. I read every single comment. And if you have something that you want to say about your chart, or if this is evoking new questions, then please put them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye!